There comes a time in life when the heart wrestles with what the soul already knows. You sit across from someone who once stirred butterflies in your chest, and now all you feel is stillness. Not peace, but an unsettling quiet, like a storm waiting to break. You look at them, but something inside you whispers, "This isn't it." And no matter how many prayers you whisper or tears you shed, the heavens stay quiet. But make no mistake, God's silence isn't always absence. Sometimes, silence is the loudest warning of all. We often think that if we love someone, God must have sent them, that affection is approval, that attraction equals alignment. But emotions, as powerful as they are, can be deceptive. What we feel is not always what is right. The human heart is capable of deep longing, and yet it can long for what breaks it. That is why we need divine guidance, because what feels good to the flesh can be poison to the soul. What looks right in the moment may lead us years down the road of regret. God's will is not merely about our happiness in the moment. It is about the protection and positioning of our entire lives. When He removes someone, it may not always make sense in the natural. You may feel like you've lost your blessing, when in truth, He's protected you from a burden. But it takes spiritual maturity to recognize that being pulled away from someone can be an act of love from heaven. Think of this. A child might cry when a parent takes away a knife from their hand, not understanding the danger. To the child, the parent is cruel, but to the parent, the act was mercy. In the same way, God sometimes separates us from people who would hurt us, hinder us, or hold us back from our true calling. And we cry, we plead, we fight, but the Father knows better. He knows when to say, "Father, feed the flock." And the Father, you may be wondering, but how do I know if it's God telling me to walk away? That's the question many wrestle with in the midnight hour when the pillow is soaked with tears. You've prayed, you've waited, and yet things keep falling apart. Your spirit feels heavier around this person. You don't dream anymore. You don't laugh like you used to. The relationship has become more of a survival than a blessing. These are not coincidences. These are signs. And when you ignore these signs, things begin to unravel. You'll notice you're constantly drained. Your spiritual sensitivity dulls. Your relationship with God weakens. You stop pursuing your purpose. Why? Because you've entangled yourself with someone who was never meant to carry the weight of your calling. Your destiny begins to suffocate under the pressure of being with the wrong person. And all the while, God waits, not with anger, but with patience. He waits for you to see what He's been trying to show you. So what happens when God doesn't want you with someone? He doesn't always send lightning. Sometimes He simply allows discomfort. He removes peace. He blocks progress. He lets you feel the cost of forcing something He never signed off. And when you finally step back, when you finally let go, you'll feel it. The breath of peace, the lift of burdens, the silent confirmation that heaven has been waiting for you to trust. This is not about judgment, it's about discernment. God wants to bless you with the right person at the right time. But He can't do that if you're still clinging to what He's trying to take away. So before we walk blindly into heartbreak, let's learn the signs. Let's look beyond emotions and into the Spirit, because God doesn't just open doors, He closes them too. And sometimes the greatest miracle is not in who walks in, but in who walks out. You lose your peace around them. Peace is not something you can manufacture. It's not a mood or a temporary emotional high. It is a divine presence. It is one of the clearest confirmations that God is involved in something. When your heart is aligned with His will, peace becomes your companion. It may not mean everything is easy, but deep within, there is stillness, a settled sense that you are safe, right where you're meant to be. But when God doesn't want you with someone, that peace begins to unravel, not all at once, but thread by thread. At first it's subtle. You can't quite name it, but something feels off. You begin to feel tension where there should be calm. You second guess every word, every silence. Your soul doesn't rest, even when your body does. You may be lying next to them, but it feels like your spirit is miles away. And the most haunting part, you remember a time when you felt peace before they entered your life. God does not operate in confusion. When He is present in a relationship, there is clarity, a sense of direction, not absence of conflict, but a peace that passes understanding, even when storms come. But when He is absent, confusion multiplies. You start compromising your standards to keep the connection. You start defending dysfunction in the name of loyalty. And the more you try to make it work, the more exhausted you become. This is not just emotional unrest. This is spiritual misalignment. Your spirit is trying to warn you that something is off, and no matter how much you try to pray it away, it persists. Why? Because God is not trying to fix that connection. He's trying to free you from it. You might tell yourself, but they're not bad, they love me. That may be true, but not everyone who loves you is meant to go where God is taking you. Sometimes they carry peace for someone else's journey, not yours. When you lose your peace, you lose your anchor. And when you're not anchored, the storms of life will break you down, even if you love who's beside you. Many ignore this sign because peace doesn't scream, it whispers. And in a world that glorifies chaos and drama in love, peace is mistaken for boredom. But peace is where God lives. He is not the author of confusion. If being with someone constantly clouds your mind, weighs your heart, or silences your spirit, take notice. The absence of peace is not a punishment. It's a signal. It's heaven's gentle way of guiding you back to center, back to safety. And the more you ignore it, the more unrest you will feel until your body is present, but your soul has already walked away. Peace is God's fingerprint. When it lifts, it's not to punish, it's to protect. Your purpose starts fading in their presence. Your purpose is sacred. It is not just a calling, it is the reason your soul was crafted with breath and life. When God places a purpose in you, He intends to surround you with people who water it, protect it, and push it to grow. But when you're connected to someone God never intended, you will begin to feel that purpose dim, like a fire slowly starved of oxygen. You'll notice that your dreams begin to blur. The clarity you once had becomes fog. You no longer speak with the conviction you used to. You used to talk about your calling, your ideas, your spiritual growth. Now your conversations revolve around trying to fix what's broken, explain yourself, or survive one emotional upheaval after another. And somewhere in that slow erosion, your identity becomes tied not to your purpose, but to their approval. It's a dangerous thing to give someone the power to dim your divine assignment. But it happens silently. You start missing church. You stop writing. You stop building. You stop dreaming. Not because the dream died, but because you got entangled with someone who didn't see it, honor it, or make room for it. When God brings someone into your life, they don't distract you from your calling. They protect it. They remind you of who you are when you forget. They encourage you to keep going when you're weary. But when it's not from God, the opposite happens. You become smaller, quieter, more passive. Your light starts to flicker, and you begin to adjust your dreams to fit someone else's limitations. Purpose will always expose compatibility. If you find yourself having to choose, between peace and the person, between growth and the relationship, then the answer is already before you. God will never call you to betray your purpose to keep someone. That's not love. That's bondage dressed in affection. Some people are not evil, they're just unequipped to walk beside the version of you that is fully alive in God. They love you in fragments, but your purpose demands wholeness. And when you start bending to fit into someone else's comfort zone, you step out of the divine alignment that once brought you life. God doesn't require you to choose between love and purpose. He merges them. If the presence of someone is making you neglect what God gave you, that's not alignment, that's derailment. The more time you spend trying to convince them to see what God showed you, the more energy you lose for the assignment itself. There is a heaviness that comes when you're out of sync with your mission. The dreams that once ignited your mornings now feel like burdens. The voice that once prophesied over others now trembles in doubt, and you wonder, what happened to me? What happened is that you yoked yourself to someone whose pace, path, and purpose do not match yours. And slowly, your spirit began to adjust to survive, instead of to thrive. But the moment you recognize it, you regain your power, because your purpose was never meant to shrink for someone to feel safe beside you. They pull you away from God, not toward Him. One of the clearest signs that someone is not meant to stay in your life, no matter how close, how charming, or how loving they appear, is when their presence starts pulling you away from God instead of drawing you closer. The shift doesn't usually happen overnight. It's a slow erosion, a gentle drift. You don't even notice it at first because it hides behind excuses. We're just busy. We'll get back to praying soon. Me believe in God, just not the way I do. You make justifications until one day you look up and realize the distance between you and heaven is wider than it's ever been. When God ordains a relationship, that relationship becomes a spiritual bridge, not a barrier. It becomes a space where your faith breathes, not suffocates. It's where you hear God's voice more clearly, not less. Where your spirit becomes more awake, not more numb. But when you're with someone who is not meant for you, that divine connection begins to fracture. Your prayer life becomes weak. The desire to open the Word fades. Your spiritual hunger is replaced by emotional exhaustion. This is how you know. When being with them causes you to lower your spiritual standards, numb your conscience, or ignore God's whispers, something is wrong. God doesn't compete for your attention. He doesn't beg for your time. He doesn't share space with anything that causes your heart to drift. If you find yourself trying to maintain a relationship at the cost of intimacy with God, you are not in love. You are in danger. Some people come into your life and make sin seem soft. They make compromise feel like love. They don't tell you to turn from God, but their influence is enough to distract you from Him. They might not curse God, but they curse the pace of your growth. They might not mock your faith, but they never sit and pray with you either. Over time, that absence becomes loud. The conversations that once ignited your spirit now leave you cold. And when you try to share your convictions, they look at you with disinterest or dismissiveness. The enemy doesn't always come to destroy your faith with force. Sometimes he comes disguised as love. Love that feels good to the flesh but poisons the soul. Love that satisfies emotions but depletes your spiritual strength. You think you're in a relationship, but what you're really in is spiritual warfare, a battle between who you're becoming in God and who they need you to remain so they don't feel convicted by your growth. This kind of misalignment is not just unhealthy, it's dangerous, because over time you stop fighting for your anointing. You become content with lukewarmness. You start believing that comfort is better than calling, and God watches. not because he's distant, but because he never forces your hand. He gave you free will, but he also gives you signs. And this is one of them. The moment you begin shrinking spiritually in the presence of someone you love is the moment you must ask, did God send them, or did I choose them to fill a void only God was meant to fill? The relationship feels like a constant spiritual battle. There's a kind of heaviness that isn't physical. You feel it when you wake up. You feel it even when they're not in the room. It follows your thoughts. It clings to your prayers. It drains your energy, yet you can't always explain it. That's not just emotional tension. Often that's spiritual warfare, and the most unsettling thing? It's coming from a relationship you thought was a blessing. When a relationship is not God-ordained, it doesn't just trouble the mind, it troubles the spirit. You find yourself constantly trying to fix things, to explain yourself, to make it work. Every conversation feels like walking through a battlefield, not building a partnership. You keep thinking, this is just a rough season, but deep down you sense this is something deeper. Like your soul is in a tug of war between light and darkness. You might be smiling in public, but behind the scenes your spirit is tired, not because you're weak, but because you're fighting battles that were never yours to fight. You're carrying weights that were never assigned to you. That's the tragedy of being yoked to someone who is not in alignment with your divine path. The relationship becomes a spiritual battlefield instead of a sanctuary. This is more than miscommunication or personality differences. This is something deeper. Your dreams clash with their limitations. Your prayers feel like they hit a wall. Every time you try to rise spiritually, it feels like something in the relationship pulls you down again. That's not love, that's warfare. And it's not always because the other person is evil. Sometimes they're simply unhealed, unaware or unwilling to grow. But no matter the reason, their presence becomes the source of internal chaos. When God joins two people, their connection creates peace. Not perfection, but peace. There's clarity. There's rhythm. Even in disagreements, there's mutual growth. But when it's not from God, the rhythm becomes disruption. The clarity becomes confusion, and you find yourself constantly battling things you were never meant to confront in the first place. Some people aren't sent to build with you. They're sent to test whether you'll fight to stay where God already told you to leave. And that test, if ignored, becomes a cycle. You cry, repent, pray for strength, and then return to the same battlefield, hoping this time it will be different. But it isn't. Because what you're battling isn't just relational, it's spiritual. And spiritual problems can't be solved with human effort alone. When your soul begins to dim, your spiritual sensitivity dulls, and the presence of someone causes more battles than blessings, God isn't punishing you. He's trying to awaken you. He's showing you that peace has been replaced with survival and joy with justifications. You were never meant to fight for a connection that's costing you your clarity, your purpose, and your presence with God. If every interaction leaves your spirit bruised, if every prayer turns into a plea for relief, then it's time to ask, is this love? Or have I turned a battleground into a home? God removes them again and again, but you keep reconnecting. When God removes someone from your life, it's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. It might look like a fight that leads to distance, a breakup that came out of nowhere, a falling out that didn't make sense at the time, and yet somehow they return. And you allow them back in, believing perhaps it was just a misunderstanding, a timing issue, a test of your loyalty. But what if it wasn't any of that? What if it was divine intervention? There is a holy pattern we often overlook. The people God doesn't want in your life don't stay easily. No matter how many times you try to rebuild the connection, it falls apart again. and again and again. This is not coincidence. It is divine protection disguised as inconvenience. God, in His mercy, removes what our hearts are too entangled to release. But we, in our stubbornness, mistake His kindness for a challenge to overcome. You tell yourself, this time will be different, but the patterns repeat. The emotional wounds reopen, the cycle spins again, and each time you return, a piece of you grows dimmer. You're not just reuniting with someone, you're delaying your healing. You're inviting back what God, in His love, tried to deliver you from. When a door keeps closing, we must stop praying for it to reopen. God doesn't shut things without reason. When He removes someone, He's not trying to punish them or you. He's trying to preserve what He's building in your life. He sees what you cannot. He hears conversations when you're not in the room. He sees how they truly treat your spirit, not just your body. And when He moves them out of the way, it's an act of rescue, not rejection. But the human heart has its attachments. We remember the good days. We crave the comfort of familiarity. We confuse longing with love, and so we reach back out. We respond to that text. We meet for that final closure conversation, and the cycle reignites. Not because it was meant to, but because we invited it back in. Every time you reconnect with someone God is removing, you are delaying your destiny. You're pausing your purpose. You're walking in circles while your future waits. And while God is patient, He will not force you to walk through a door you refuse to acknowledge. He will let you walk that circle until the ache teaches you what the whisper could not, until the pain becomes the proof that you were never meant to stay there. You are not being punished. You are being trained. Trained to recognize the voice of God when it comes not as thunder, but as a pattern, a repeated intervention, a quiet exit. The cycle isn't love. It's disobedience dressed in emotion. And until you let go fully, not just in body, but in spirit, you'll keep returning to the same hurt, wearing a different excuse. Some removals are not to be healed. They are to be honored, because when God takes someone out of your life, He's doing what you were too kind, too hopeful, or too afraid to do. That removal is the beginning of something sacred, but only if you stop reopening what heaven already closed. 6. You experience more tears than growth. Tears are not always a sign of weakness. In fact, in many moments, they are sacred. They reveal the softness of your heart, the sincerity of your love, the depth of your disappointment. But when your days become filled with more tears than hope, more breakdowns than breakthroughs, more anxiety than anticipation, something is wrong. Love, even in its trials, is supposed to grow you, not undo you. We are often taught that relationships require sacrifice, that growth comes through hardship, that love demands endurance, and yes, all of that has truth. But when a connection causes you to cry more than it helps you rise, you must ask, is this building me or breaking me? God-ordained relationships stretch you toward your destiny. They challenge your character, yes, but they do not tear down your worth. They may test your patience, but they never rob you of peace. For when the relationship is not from God, it becomes a place of emotional chaos. You begin to doubt yourself, you lose your joy, you second-guess your value. And the most tragic part? You begin to call this normal. You start telling yourself that love is pain, that this is just your cross to carry, that perhaps God wants you to suffer here for a greater purpose. But hear this, God does not write stories that destroy His children. He doesn't use love as a weapon. He doesn't ask you to shrink so someone else can feel taller. The voice that tells you to settle in suffering is not the voice of heaven. It's the echo of unhealed wounds and misplaced loyalty. If the majority of your days are filled with grief, silence, arguments, and emotional isolation, that is not love, and it is certainly not God's will. Growth in a godly relationship may bring tears, but those tears lead to transformation. You cry and then you rise. You struggle and then you break through. You fall and then you soar. But if all you do is weep and wonder why you're not enough, that is not growth. That is decay. When someone is meant for you, you'll still face challenges, but you'll feel progress. You'll see maturity forming in your soul. Your faith will deepen, your dreams will sharpen, your strength will multiply. But if you've become a shadow of the person you used to be, if you no longer recognize the voice in your own head, then the relationship has not served as soil, it has served as poison. Tears are sacred, but they are also signals. God allows them to cleanse, but also to awaken. When they become your everyday companion, He is alerting your soul. He's showing you that this is not how you were meant to be loved. The Bible speaks of love that is patient, kind, not easily angered, love that protects, trusts, and rejoices in truth. If what you're in feels more like a battle than a blessing, if your strength keeps getting chipped away just to stay connected, then God is not testing your love. He's trying to free it. Love should challenge your selfishness, not your sanity. If your spirit weeps more than it worships, God may be showing you that growth has stopped and grief has taken its place. Every time you try to walk away, you feel God's peace flood in. There's something almost holy about the moment you finally begin to let go. After all the holding on, after the tears and prayers and silent nights, there comes a quiet release. And with it something unexpected, peace. Not the kind that shouts or dances, but the kind that rests in your chest like still waters after a storm. And if you're paying attention, you'll know it didn't come from you, it came from God. Have you ever noticed that when you're with them, you feel restless, but the moment you create space, even for a few hours or days, peace begins to trickle back in? Your thoughts become clearer, your chest feels lighter, you start dreaming again, you begin to feel you again. That's not coincidence. That's confirmation. The presence of peace is not just a feeling, it's a spiritual signal. It's God's way of saying, you're finally stepping back into alignment. You may still love them, you may still miss them, but despite that, a part of you knows this is right. This release is sacred. Many people assume that if something hurts to let go, it must be wrong. But some things hurt to hold on to even more. Pain is not always a sign to stay. Sometimes it's the cost of obedience. And obedience to God doesn't always feel good at first. It feels lonely, it feels confusing, it feels like loss. But the reward is always the same: peace. There's a kind of pain that heals and a kind of comfort that kills. Staying with someone who constantly drains you, distracts you, or delays your calling may feel familiar, but it is not faith. Faith is trusting God enough to walk away even when your heart begs to stay. And here's what happens. The moment you finally take that step, the moment you stop checking your phone for their name, stop replaying old conversations, stop fighting for a seat in their life, heaven opens something new, the burden lifts, the clarity returns, and you realize that what you thought was love was actually a lesson. God does not want you to build your future on a foundation He never laid. He won't bless what you refuse to surrender, but once you do, truly, deeply, wholly, He rushes in, not with punishment, but with presence, not with bitterness, but with peace. And you'll wonder why you didn't let go sooner, because the proof was always there. Every time you walked away, you felt peace. That peace wasn't an illusion. It was God, standing on the other side of your obedience, whispering, "This is the way. Walk in it." So now you've seen the signs, not signs of judgment, but signs of divine mercy. A loss of peace, a fading purpose, a heart drifting from God, a soul stuck in battle, a pattern of removal, a life filled with more tears than growth, and a sacred peace every time you try to let go. These are not random feelings, they are holy messages. They are the whispers of a loving Father saying, "I have more for you, but I cannot give it while your hands are full of what I never intended." God's greatest gifts often come after our greatest releases. He cannot pour fresh oil into a vessel already full of yesterday's pain. He cannot write a new chapter if we're clinging to the last page with bleeding hands. You were not created to chase what confuses you, to water what starves you, or to beg to be chosen. You are a child of God, set apart, loved deeply, destined for purpose. And anyone God joins to your life will be a reflection of that truth, not a contradiction to it. So if you recognize yourself in these signs, don't just acknowledge them. Act. Let your heart break if it must, but don't let it blind you. Let go, not because you're giving up, but because you're making room. Make room for peace. Make room for growth. Make room for the kind of love that doesn't make you question your worth or distance you from your Creator. God is not trying to take something from you. He is trying to give you something better, something holy, something lasting, something real. But first, you must trust Him enough to let go.